Somewhere beneath the Southern Ocean, where the water drops below the freezing point of fresh water and stays there, there is a fish moving through the dark. It has no red blood cells, no hemoglobin. Its blood, if you could call it that, runs almost completely clear. Now, if you learned anything in biology class, you probably know that hemoglobin is the protein that carries oxygen through your body. It's in every red blood cell, shuttling oxygen from your lungs to your brain, your heart, your muscles. Without it, tissues start to fail. The brain is one of the first to go. This is considered one of the non-negotiable rules of vertebrate life. This fish didn't get the memo. It swims, it feeds, it grows, it raises young, and it does all of this in water so cold that most other creatures would freeze solid from the inside out without what every other backbone animal on Earth requires just to stay alive. Its body is pale, almost ghostly. Its heart is enormous for its size, beating hard, moving rivers of that colorless blood through a system built entirely around a problem that by every rule we know should have killed its ancestors millions of years ago. And here's the thing that makes this stranger still. This isn't some rare mutant. It's not a quirk of one unlucky fish. It's an entire family of species thriving for millions of years in one of the most hostile places on Earth. Evolution doesn't usually keep mistakes around this long, so either this isn't a mistake or something about this place changed the rules entirely. Today we're stepping slowly into that frozen underwater world to meet the Antarctic icefish and discover how it keeps beating the odds in the most extreme place on the planet. Before we dive in, I'm curious. Are you listening to this while trying to fall asleep, or are you just here for some mind-blowing science? Drop a comment and let me know. Long before any creature slips through polar darkness, a quieter rule shapes life at its most basic level. Every movement, every thought, every slow beat of a heart depends on a steady supply of energy, and that energy begins with oxygen. Inside living cells, oxygen allows tiny molecular engines to release power from food, sustaining everything from the smallest twitch of muscle to the silent work of the brain. In most animals with backbones, this exchange is carefully managed by a system that feels almost universal. Blood flows in looping paths driven by the heart, carrying dissolved gases between the outer world and the deep interior of the body. Within that blood, countless red cells drift in dense suspension, each one filled with a protein designed for a single purpose. Hemoglobin binds oxygen where it is abundant, then lets it go where it is needed most. At the surface of the gills, where water brushes past thin membranes, oxygen slips inward and attaches itself to these molecules. The bond is gentle enough to release later, yet strong enough to hold during the journey. As blood travels onward, pressure and chemistry shift, and the oxygen detaches, diffusing into waiting tissues. Muscles receive it and continue their slow contractions. Organs maintain their balance, and the brain sustains its quiet electrical patterns. Remove that system, and the balance begins to unravel. Without red blood cells, the burden falls entirely on the surrounding fluid, the plasma itself. Plasma can carry oxygen, but only in small amounts, dissolved like a faint trace in water. It lacks the capacity to store and transport large volumes efficiently. In most environments, this limitation becomes immediate and severe. Warmth deepens the problem. As temperature rises, oxygen becomes less soluble in liquid. The same volume of plasma holds even less of it, thinning the supply just as demand increases. Cells continue to require energy at a steady pace, yet the delivery falters. Tissues begin to strain under the shortage, and the most sensitive systems are the first to fail. The brain, with its constant need for oxygen, cannot tolerate interruption for long. Muscles weaken, coordination slips, and vital processes slow. In nearly all vertebrates, such a condition would lead quickly to collapse. The absence of hemoglobin is not a small adjustment, but a fundamental break in a system that supports nearly every function of life. Across rivers, forests, deserts, and open oceans, this rule holds with quiet consistency. Blood must carry oxygen efficiently, or the organism cannot endure. Evolution, working over immense stretches of time, has refined this mechanism rather than replaced it. Variations appear in form and detail, yet the core principle remains intact, a shared solution repeated across countless species. Within this framework, the idea of surviving without red blood cells stands in stark contrast to expectation. It suggests a body relying on a medium that cannot, under ordinary conditions, meet its needs. It implies a system stretched beyond what biology typically allows, where supply would fall short of demand at every turn. Set against the broader patterns of life, such a change would almost always end before it could take hold. A mutation removing hemoglobin would spread only if it did not threaten survival, yet in most places it would do exactly that. The organism would struggle, then disappear, leaving no trace beyond a brief interruption in the long continuity of evolution. The rule, then, is not merely a guideline, but a boundary. Oxygen must be gathered, carried, and delivered with precision. Blood, rich with hemoglobin, has long served as the quiet vessel of that task, sustaining life in forms both familiar and unseen. Within that understanding, the absence of such a system is not simply unusual. It stands at the very edge of what life is expected to endure. Stories of the Southern Ocean once traveled not through journals, but through the quiet exchange of sailors who spent long months beneath a shifting sky. Among their observations were occasional accounts of fish that seemed strangely pale when cut, lacking the deep color expected of living flesh. Some described them simply as bloodless, a word spoken without certainty, carried more as curiosity than claim. These early mentions drifted for years without resolution, folded into the broader uncertainty that surrounded Antarctic waters. The region itself remained distant and difficult to study, its cold and isolation limiting careful examination. What was seen on the decks of ships rarely reached the precision required for science, and so the idea lingered at the edge of credibility, neither accepted nor entirely dismissed. By the early 20th century, fragments of that uncertainty began to take form. Expeditions brought back preserved specimens, collected with greater intention, their bodies stored for later inspection. When these fish were examined in controlled settings, the absence that had once been described in passing began to take on clearer meaning. Their tissues appeared unusually translucent, their vessels lacking the familiar density that typically accompanies circulating blood. Even then, interpretation moved slowly. Assumptions built over centuries do not yield easily, especially when they concern processes so central to life. It was expected that something had been missed, perhaps a subtle pigment or a degradation caused by preservation. The idea that a vertebrate could exist without red blood cells pressed against the limits of what physiology allowed. In the 1950s, closer analysis finally settled the question. Fresh specimens observed under more precise conditions revealed a circulatory system unlike any other known among vertebrates. Microscopic examination showed no red blood cells moving through the vessels. Chemical tests confirmed the absence of hemoglobin, the very molecule long understood as essential for transporting oxygen. What had once been a sailor's impression now stood as a documented fact. The reaction within the scientific community was not immediate acceptance, but a quiet resistance shaped by the weight of established knowledge. For physiologists, the discovery did not simply add a new species to the catalog of life. It challenged a principle that had been treated as foundational. Oxygen transport, long understood as dependent on hemoglobin, appeared here to follow an entirely different path. Careful repetition of the findings became necessary. Independent studies confirmed the same absence, again and again, until doubt gradually gave way to recognition. The fish in question were not malformed individuals or temporary anomalies. They represented a consistent biological state, one that persisted across multiple specimens and, soon, across related species. What made the discovery particularly striking was its completeness. These were adult vertebrates, fully developed, moving through their environment with no trace of the cellular structures thought indispensable. The absence was not partial or reduced, but total. In place of expectation stood a system that seemed to function without the components most others relied upon. For those who studied circulation and respiration, this presented a quiet puzzle. If hemoglobin was not present, then oxygen must be carried in another way, or the demands of the body must differ from those of other vertebrates. Each possibility required a reconsideration of limits that had once felt firmly set. The discovery did not immediately provide answers, but it reshaped the questions themselves. As understanding deepened, the early reports from whalers gained a new kind of clarity. What had been observed in passing had been accurate all along, though its significance had not yet been understood. The word bloodless, once imprecise, now pointed toward a genuine biological condition, one that would continue to unfold in meaning as the surrounding environment and evolutionary history came into view. In this way, the discovery settled into the broader narrative of life, not as an exception easily explained, but as a quiet shift in perspective. A system thought universal had revealed an unexpected variation, and in that variation, a new path began to emerge. Deep within the quiet architecture of a cell, long strands of DNA carry instructions written across immense stretches of time. These sequences guide the formation of proteins, shaping structures and processes with careful precision. Among them once lay the genes responsible for building alpha and beta globin, the paired components that come together to form hemoglobin. At some distant point in the past, those instructions were interrupted. A deletion occurred, not a subtle alteration, but a removal, erasing segments that had been conserved across countless generations. Where there had been continuity, there remained only fragments, small pieces of genetic code that no longer assembled into anything functional. The blueprint for hemoglobin, once complete, had been broken. These remnants still persist, scattered within the genome like faint echoes of a former design. They resemble the original sequences, yet lack the integrity required to produce the proteins they once encoded. When the cell reads these regions, nothing emerges to carry oxygen in the familiar way. The machinery continues its work, but this particular pathway remains silent. The timing of this loss reaches back millions of years, into an era when ancestral forms moved through waters already changing in subtle but decisive ways. The deletion did not appear in isolation within a single individual that vanished without consequence. Instead, it entered a lineage and remained, passing quietly from one generation to the next. At first, such a change would have narrowed the margin for survival. Individuals carrying the deletion would have faced constraints that others did not, their physiology operating under conditions that strained the balance between supply and demand. In most settings, this imbalance would have led to disappearance, the altered genes fading from the population as quickly as they arose. Yet here, something different unfolded. The deletion did not vanish. It persisted, and over time, it spread. Each new generation carried the absence forward until it was no longer a rare occurrence, but a defining feature of the group. The genetic landscape shifted, not through addition or refinement, but through the retention of what had been lost. Evolution, often described as a process of accumulation, revealed another side of its nature. It does not act with intention, nor does it preserve traits based on familiarity. It filters variation through survival, allowing certain patterns to continue when they do not hinder existence within a given environment. In this case, the loss of globin genes, though severe by conventional measure, did not prevent continuation. As generations passed, the population became increasingly unified in this absence. The functional copies of alpha and beta globin genes disappeared entirely, leaving behind only the broken sequences as markers of what once existed. The circulatory system adapted around this gap, shaped by pressures that differed from those faced by most vertebrates. The persistence of this deletion introduces a quiet tension into the story of life. A change that should have imposed a limit instead became a foundation. The expectation that certain components are indispensable begins to soften, replaced by the recognition that necessity can shift when conditions allow it. Within the genome, the silence of those missing genes remains constant. There is no hidden reserve, no alternate version waiting to be expressed. The absence is complete, carried across every cell, every individual within the lineage. What began as a single deletion has become a shared inheritance, embedded deeply enough that reversal no longer appears within reach. In this stillness, the usual rules of biological design seem to bend. A system once anchored by a specific molecule continues without it, not through restoration, but through accommodation. The genome records the loss without correction, and life proceeds along a path shaped by that absence, steady and unbroken across the passage of time. Far beyond the scale of any single organism, the shape of the planet itself began to shift, slowly guiding the conditions that would one day allow such an unusual form of life to persist. Continents moved with quiet momentum, altering the pathways of ocean currents and the distribution of heat across the globe. Over immense spans of time, Antarctica drifted into isolation, its connection to surrounding landmasses gradually severed. Around 34 million years ago, this separation reached a critical point. A continuous band of water formed around the continent, giving rise to the Antarctic circumpolar current. This vast flow began to circle endlessly, unbroken by land, creating a barrier that limited the exchange of warmer waters from lower latitudes. The ocean around Antarctica settled into a new state, one defined by stability and cold. As this current strengthened, temperatures declined and then held, no longer subject to the wider fluctuations seen elsewhere on Earth. The surrounding seas became a realm of persistent chill, where seasonal changes softened and extremes narrowed into a steady range. Over time, this constancy shaped not only the landscape above, but the chemistry of the water itself. Cold water carries gases differently than warm water. As temperatures fall, the ability of liquid to hold dissolved oxygen increases. Molecules that would escape more readily in warmer conditions remain suspended, filling the water with a higher concentration than is typical in most marine environments. In these southern oceans, oxygen became abundant in a way that subtly altered the constraints placed on life. This abundance did not announce itself with sudden change. It settled in quietly, becoming part of the background against which evolution unfolded. Organisms that inhabited these waters existed within a medium already rich in the element required for cellular energy. The gradient between environment and body, between water and tissue, shifted in ways that eased the passage of oxygen into living systems. Within such conditions, the strict dependence on specialized transport began to soften. Where oxygen is plentiful and readily dissolved, the distance it must travel within an organism can be bridged with less reliance on concentrated carriers. The surrounding water, saturated with this essential molecule, provided a buffer against limitations that would otherwise prove decisive. The lineage carrying the deletion of globin genes found itself within this altered world. What might have been an insurmountable deficit in another setting became here a challenge moderated by the environment. Oxygen could still move into the body and through it, not with the efficiency seen elsewhere, but with enough consistency to sustain life under these specific conditions. Over generations, this interaction between organism and environment deepened. The cold remained steady, the oxygen supply remained high, and the absence within the genome did not prevent continuation. Instead, the surrounding sea compensated, its properties aligning with the needs of bodies that no longer followed the usual pattern. The circumpolar current continued its endless motion, maintaining the isolation that preserved these conditions. It prevented the intrusion of warmer waters that might have altered the balance, and in doing so, it upheld a system where unusual adaptations could persist without immediate consequence. The ocean itself became part of the organism's extended physiology, shaping what was possible within its boundaries. In this way, the broader environment did not simply host life, but participated in its unfolding. The cold, the current, and the chemistry of the water together created a setting in which a significant loss could be carried forward rather than erased. The rules that governed survival did not disappear, but they shifted, guided by conditions that favored a different balance. Within this quiet alignment, a path opened that would remain closed almost everywhere else. The sea, in its still and frigid state, allowed life to continue along a route shaped not by addition, but by absence, sustained by a world that had changed in just the right way. Within the steady rhythm of its body, one structure grows beyond what would normally be expected, expanding in quiet proportion to a challenge carried in every cell. The heart, shaped by the same absence that defines the rest of the organism, becomes larger, its walls broader, its chambers widen to hold and move greater volumes with each beat. Measured against its body, this organ reaches 3 to 4 times the relative size seen in many other fish. It does not thicken in isolation, but integrates with vessels that stretch outward, forming a network designed to move fluid with unusual efficiency. Each contraction sends a surge forward, not dense with cells, but clear and thin, flowing with a different kind of purpose. Without the concentrated carriers found elsewhere, the burden shifts toward movement itself. Oxygen, dissolved within the plasma, must be delivered in greater quantities by increasing the rate at which it passes through tissues. Rather than relying on each unit of blood to carry more, the system sends more blood through, allowing volume to compensate for what is absent at the molecular level. This approach shapes the rhythm of circulation. The heart beats with a steady persistence, pushing a continuous stream through arteries and into finer vessels. The flow does not pause or surge sharply, but maintains a consistency that supports the gradual exchange occurring along capillary walls. Oxygen diffuses into cells as the plasma passes, sustained not by concentration, but by repetition and reach. The nature of the fluid itself assists in this process. Without the presence of red blood cells, the plasma remains less viscous, its resistance to movement reduced. It slips more easily through narrow passages, requiring less force to maintain circulation. In the cold, where fluids often thicken and slow, this clarity becomes an advantage, allowing motion to remain smooth even as temperatures remain low. Energy is conserved in subtle ways. The heart, though large, does not need to overcome the same internal friction found in denser blood. Each beat moves its contents forward with relative ease, translating effort into flow without excessive strain. The system balances its demands, distributing work across structure and movement rather than concentrating it in chemical capacity. Over time, this design settles into a stable pattern. The enlarged heart does not represent excess, but alignment with the conditions in which it operates. It becomes a central feature of the organism's physiology, supporting a circulatory strategy that differs in form yet continues to meet the needs of living tissue. Vessels expand to accommodate the increased volume, their walls adapted to handle a steady passage of fluid that moves more freely than in other vertebrates. The entire system functions as a coordinated whole, each component adjusted to support the others. The absence at the molecular level is mirrored by a presence at the structural level, creating a balance that holds across the body. In this quiet adjustment, the usual expectations surrounding circulation begin to shift. Efficiency is not achieved through concentration alone, but through the continuous movement of a medium shaped by its own simplicity. The heart, enlarged and steady, becomes the center of this approach, sustaining a flow that carries what is needed through means that differ from the familiar pattern. The rhythm persists, unhurried and constant, maintaining a connection between the environment and the inner workings of the organism. With each cycle, the system reaffirms its balance, not by restoring what was lost, but by building around that loss with structures that support a different way of sustaining life. Along the outer edges of its body, where water passes in quiet contact, another set of changes unfolds, less obvious than the steady pulse within, but just as essential. The surfaces that meet the surrounding sea expand and refine, shaped into structures that favor exchange over protection, allowing the boundary between organism and environment to soften. The gills extend outward in delicate layers, their surface area enlarged beyond what is commonly seen in related species. Each filament branches into finer structures, increasing the total space through which oxygen can pass. As water moves across these thin membranes, dissolved molecules slip inward, guided by gradients that form naturally between the external environment and the tissues within. This expansion does not rely on speed or force. The movement of water remains gentle, the exchange continuous rather than hurried. Oxygen enters steadily, finding its way into the circulating plasma that flows just beneath the surface. The process unfolds without interruption, sustained by the consistency of the surrounding conditions. Beyond the gills, the skin itself takes on an unexpected role. It remains thin and largely without scales, reducing the distance between the outer world and the internal fluid that carries oxygen onward. Beneath this surface, a network of fine capillaries spreads close to the exterior, positioning the circulating plasma within reach of the water that surrounds the body. Through this arrangement, oxygen diffuses directly across the skin, supplementing what is gathered at the gills. The boundary becomes a site of quiet exchange where molecules pass without the need for specialized structures alone. The body, in effect, opens itself more fully to its environment, allowing multiple pathways for the same essential process. The absence of scales contributes to this openness. Where thicker coverings might offer protection, they would also limit the ease with which gases can move. Here, the reduction of such barriers favors permeability, aligning structure with the need for efficient diffusion. The skin, translucent and unarmored, becomes part of the respiratory system itself. Within this combined framework, the reliance on plasma alone becomes sufficient. The surrounding water, enriched with dissolved oxygen, provides a constant source that feeds both gill and skin. As the plasma circulates, it gathers oxygen from these expanded surfaces and carries it inward, maintaining a balance that supports cellular function. This method does not mirror the concentrated transport seen in other vertebrates. Instead, it distributes the task across multiple interfaces, increasing contact rather than capacity. The organism depends on the steady availability of oxygen in its environment, drawing from it continuously through structures adapted to maximize exposure. The flow of water across the body remains calm, guided by subtle movements and the natural currents of the surrounding sea. Each passing moment brings new contact, new opportunity for exchange, sustaining the process without the need for abrupt motion or rapid intake. The system favors constancy, aligning with the stable conditions in which it exists. Over time, these adaptations settle into a cohesive design. The enlarged gills, the thin skin, and the underlying network of vessels function together, creating a respiratory approach that differs from the usual pattern yet remains effective within its context. The absence at the molecular level is balanced by an expansion at the surface, allowing oxygen to enter through multiple pathways. In this quiet interaction between body and water, the boundary becomes less defined. The organism draws from its surroundings in a continuous exchange, its structures shaped to meet the conditions that sustain it. The result is a system that relies not on concentration within, but on openness to what lies beyond, maintaining life through steady contact with an oxygen-rich world. At temperatures where ordinary fluids begin to crystallize, the boundary between liquid and solid becomes fragile, shifting with the slightest disturbance. In these conditions, even a small formation of ice can expand rapidly, its structure spreading through surrounding water with quiet persistence. For a living body, such a process would be irreversible, turning internal fluids rigid and halting every movement at once. Within this environment, another adaptation takes form at the molecular scale, subtle yet decisive. Dissolved in the circulating plasma are antifreeze glycoproteins, long chains built from repeating units that carry both sugar and protein components. They move silently through the body, present in concentrations that seem modest, yet capable of altering the behavior of water itself. These molecules do not prevent freezing by lowering temperature in the conventional sense. Instead, they interact directly with the earliest formations of ice, binding to the surface of microscopic crystals as they begin to appear. By attaching themselves in this way, they interrupt further growth, creating a barrier that stops the crystal from expanding into larger, more damaging structures. The effect is precise and localized. Rather than changing the entire fluid, the glycoproteins focus on the critical moments when freezing would otherwise begin. Each small crystal, once formed, becomes coated and held in a state that cannot easily extend. The surrounding water remains fluid, its motion preserved even as temperatures fall below what would normally allow liquid to exist. This interaction depends on the shape and arrangement of the molecules. Their structure aligns with the lattice of ice, fitting against it closely enough to interfere with its progression. The process unfolds continuously, with countless molecular encounters occurring throughout the plasma, maintaining a delicate balance that keeps the internal environment stable. The presence of these antifreeze compounds reaches back through the lineage, appearing before or alongside the genetic changes that removed hemoglobin. Their emergence provided a foundation upon which other adaptations could later build, ensuring that the body remained protected from freezing as additional modifications took hold. In waters that remain below the freezing point of fresh water, this protection becomes essential. The surrounding sea, though salty, still holds the capacity to initiate ice formation under the right conditions. Without a mechanism to prevent crystal growth, the internal fluids of an organism would mirror that transition, losing their fluidity and the ability to circulate. The glycoproteins maintain a narrow margin between stability and solidification. They do not eliminate the presence of ice entirely, but they control its behavior, keeping it confined and unable to spread. In doing so, they preserve the integrity of cells and vessels, allowing circulation and exchange to continue uninterrupted. This molecular system operates without visible movement, its effects revealed only through the continued fluidity of the organism. The plasma remains clear and mobile, carrying dissolved gases and nutrients through a network that depends on its liquidity. Each passage through the body reinforces the balance maintained by these invisible structures. Over time, this adaptation becomes as integral as any organ or tissue. It supports the entire physiological framework, ensuring that other systems, already adjusted to unusual conditions, can function without the added threat of freezing. The absence of hemoglobin, the reliance on flow and diffusion, all remain possible because the internal medium stays unfrozen. In this quiet interplay between temperature and chemistry, the organism maintains its continuity. The antifreeze glycoproteins move with the circulating plasma, guarding against a transformation that would otherwise end all motion. Their presence allows life to persist in a state that hovers just beyond the usual limits, sustained by a mechanism that acts at the smallest scale while supporting the whole. Form begins to shift when weight is no longer an advantage, when density itself becomes something to ease rather than maintain. In this body, structure lightens almost to the point of absence, as if the material of the organism has been thinned to match the quiet demands of its surroundings. What remains is a form composed largely of water, held together by just enough framework to sustain movement and shape. Nearly 95% of the body consists of fluid, a proportion that softens the distinction between organism and environment. The tissues retain their organization, yet they seem less opaque, less solid, allowing light to pass through in muted ways. This high water content does not weaken the body but aligns it with the medium it inhabits, reducing contrast between internal composition and the surrounding sea. Bone, where it exists, becomes lighter, its density reduced until it provides support without excess mass. The skeleton maintains its essential role, anchoring muscles and defining structure, yet it carries a subtle fragility compared to more heavily mineralized forms. This reduction lessens the overall weight, allowing the body to remain neutrally balanced within the water column. Scales, often used as protection or reinforcement, are minimal or absent across much of the surface. Their reduction further decreases density and removes barriers that might otherwise separate the organism from its environment. The exterior remains smooth and unencumbered, contributing to the overall softness of the form. Within this arrangement, the tissues take on a quality that borders on transparency. Light entering the body is not fully absorbed or scattered, but passes through layers that are thin and lightly pigmented. Beneath the surface, structures that are usually hidden become faintly visible, their outlines shifting with movement and angle. Organs appear as subtle shapes within this translucent field, their presence suggested rather than sharply defined. The gentle motion of circulation, the quiet expansion and contraction of internal spaces can be glimpsed through the outer layers. The body reveals itself not in clear detail, but in softened impressions, as if seen through a veil of water. This transparency does not serve a single purpose, but arises as a consequence of multiple adjustments. Reduced pigmentation, lighter tissues, and the absence of dense components combine to create a form that interacts with light in an unusual way. The organism becomes less distinct against its surroundings, its edges softened by the same properties that sustain its internal balance. Earlier, the pale quality of the body suggested something almost spectral, a presence that seemed to drift rather than assert itself. Here, that impression deepens, grounded not in appearance alone but in the underlying composition of the organism. The lack of dense materials, the dominance of fluid, all contribute to a form that appears only partially solid. Movement through the water reinforces this effect. As the body shifts, light bends and diffuses across its surface, revealing and concealing internal structures in a continuous, gentle interplay. The organism does not cast a strong visual signal, but remains partially blended with the medium it inhabits. In this way, the body becomes an extension of its environment, shaped by the same physical properties that define the surrounding sea. The high water content, the reduced density, and the translucent tissues all contribute to a state where distinction is softened rather than emphasized. What emerges is a form that carries its structure lightly, maintaining function while reducing excess. The organism exists as a balance between presence and permeability, its physical makeup reflecting a path shaped by conditions that favor subtlety over solidity, not as a single form, but as a quiet gathering of related lives. This lineage extends across the coastal waters, each species carrying variations on the same underlying design. There are 16 known species within this family, each distinct in shape and behavior, yet unified by the absence that defines them all. Together, they form a group found nowhere else, their range confined entirely to the waters that circle the southern continent. Their distribution follows the contours of the Antarctic coastline, inhabiting regions where the seafloor rises and falls in slow, uneven patterns. These coastal zones provide a setting where currents move gently, where food drifts in steady supply, and where the conditions that shaped their evolution remain stable. Within this space, they do not appear as rare anomalies, but as a consistent presence, woven into the fabric of the ecosystem. Over time, this family has come to represent a dominant group among Antarctic coastal fish. Their forms are varied, some elongated and slender, others broader and more compact, yet all share the same fundamental adaptations that allow them to persist where few others can. They move through the water with a quiet efficiency, occupying niches that align with their particular structures and behaviors. The origin of this lineage reaches back between 20 to 27 million years, when ancestral forms diverged from related groups that retained more familiar traits. This split marked the beginning of a separate path, one shaped by the unique conditions of the surrounding environment. As generations passed, the differences deepened, guided by the same steady pressures that defined life in these waters. Isolation played a central role in this divergence. The surrounding current, circling without interruption, limited the exchange of species between this region and the rest of the world's oceans. Within this boundary, evolutionary processes unfolded with a degree of continuity rarely found elsewhere. Variations arose and persisted within a closed system, allowing certain traits to spread and stabilize across the lineage. As the family expanded, each species adapted to specific aspects of the coastal environment. Some settled closer to the seafloor, drifting just above it, while others occupied slightly higher layers of water. Their feeding patterns, reproductive behaviors, and subtle differences in form allowed them to share the same broader habitat without direct competition overwhelming any single group. The ecosystem itself supports this diversity through a steady flow of energy. Nutrients circulate through the water, carried by currents that bring life from one region to another. Smaller organisms gather in large numbers, forming the base of a network that extends upward through multiple levels. Within this structure, the icefish find their place, connected to both what they consume and what, in turn, depends on them. Their presence influences the balance of this system. As they feed, they help regulate populations of smaller creatures, maintaining a distribution that supports the overall stability of the environment. At the same time, they serve as part of the diet for larger species, linking them into a broader web that spans the coastal regions. The expansion of this family across the Antarctic coastline reflects not a sudden dominance, but a gradual alignment with the conditions that surround them. Each species represents a continuation of the same underlying pattern, adjusted in form but consistent in function. Together, they illustrate how a lineage can extend and diversify within a specific environment, shaping and being shaped by the same steady forces. In this wider view, the individual organism becomes part of a collective presence, its characteristics echoed across related forms. The pale bodies that move through these waters are not isolated examples, but expressions of a shared evolutionary path, one that has unfolded quietly over millions of years within a world defined by its own distinct boundaries. Time settles differently in a place cut off from the wider circulation of the planet, where boundaries are not drawn by land alone but by the slow persistence of moving water. Around Antarctica, the encircling current forms such a boundary, a continuous ring that has endured for tens of millions of years, guiding what enters and what remains apart. Within this boundary, the exchange of life from distant regions becomes limited. Organisms that might otherwise drift in from warmer seas are held back, their paths diverted by the steady flow that surrounds the continent. In the same way, those that originate here rarely move beyond it, their existence contained within a system that turns inward on itself. Over approximately 30 million years, this separation has created a setting where evolutionary change unfolds with a particular kind of continuity. Variations arise within populations, shaped by local conditions, but the introduction of entirely new lineages remains rare. The genetic landscape develops along its own course, influenced more by internal shifts than by external arrivals. This limited gene flow has subtle but lasting effects. Traits that prove viable within this environment persist without being diluted by constant mixing with distant populations. Small changes accumulate, guided by pressures that remain consistent over long periods. The pace of change may appear gradual, yet it moves with steady direction, building upon what came before. The stability of the surrounding conditions reinforces this process. Temperatures remain within a narrow range, currents follow predictable paths, and the overall structure of the environment holds its form across immense spans of time. While other regions of the world experience cycles of disruption and renewal, this system maintains a quieter continuity. Within such stability, evolutionary pathways can extend further along particular trajectories. Adaptations that might be temporary elsewhere find the opportunity to persist and refine. The absence of frequent upheaval allows organisms to align closely with their environment, adjusting in ways that reflect long-term balance rather than short-term response. The circumpolar current continues its motion without interruption, sustaining the isolation that defines this region. Its presence shapes not only physical conditions, but also the flow of life itself, determining which connections are possible and which remain out of reach. In doing so, it establishes a framework within which evolution proceeds along distinct lines. For the organisms within this system, the surrounding ocean acts as both barrier and support. It limits contact with the broader world, while providing a consistent setting in which life can unfold. The interplay between restriction and stability creates a space where unusual adaptations can persist, carried forward without being replaced or overwhelmed. Over generations, this environment functions as a kind of natural laboratory, not through deliberate design, but through the quiet accumulation of conditions that favor continuity. Each lineage develops within the same boundaries, shaped by the same underlying forces, yet free to explore variations that remain compatible with the system as a whole. The result is a collection of forms that reflect the history of their isolation. Their characteristics bear the imprint of long-term stability, of evolution guided by conditions that change slowly and predictably. The absence of external influence does not halt change, but channels it along paths defined by the environment itself. In this stillness, the broader patterns of life reveal another dimension. Evolution does not always depend on constant mixing or rapid transformation. Given time and a stable setting, it can proceed through subtle adjustments, building complexity and variation within a contained world. The waters that encircle Antarctica continue to hold this balance, maintaining the separation that has defined the region for millions of years. Within that boundary, life persists and evolves, shaped by a continuity that allows even the most unusual adaptations to find their place and endure. At certain times of the year, the surface waters brighten in ways that are not immediately visible from below, yet transform the entire system with quiet intensity. Microscopic life gathers in vast numbers, spreading across the upper layers in drifting concentrations that expand with the returning light. These are phytoplankton, single-celled organisms that draw energy from sunlight and convert it into living matter, forming the base of a process that sustains everything above and beneath them. From far above, these blooms can be seen as subtle shifts in color, broad regions where the ocean takes on a muted green tone. Their scale extends across immense distances, covering areas large enough to be traced from orbit. What appears as a gentle change in hue represents an explosion of life, each cell multiplying, dividing, and contributing to a collective presence that reshapes the surrounding water. Within these blooms, oxygen is produced as a natural result of photosynthesis. As phytoplankton absorb light and carbon dioxide, they release oxygen back into the water, increasing its concentration further. This addition reinforces the already high levels present in the cold sea, creating an environment where oxygen remains abundant even as it is continuously used by other forms of life. The blooms do not exist in isolation. They draw nutrients from deeper waters, brought upward by currents that cycle through the ocean layers. These nutrients, combined with extended periods of daylight during the austral summer, allow phytoplankton to grow in sustained waves, each one feeding into the next. The process unfolds with a rhythm tied to the seasons, yet its effects persist throughout the year. As these microscopic populations expand, they become the foundation for larger gatherings. Krill, small crustaceans that move in coordinated swarms, feed directly on the phytoplankton. Their numbers grow in response to the abundance, forming dense aggregations that can stretch for hundreds of kilometers. Within these swarms, individual movement blends into a collective flow, a shifting mass that drifts with the currents. The presence of krill extends the energy captured by phytoplankton into higher levels of the ecosystem. Fish, birds, and marine mammals depend on these swarms, linking their survival to the cycles of growth that begin with microscopic cells. The food web builds upward from this base, each layer connected to the one below through the transfer of energy and matter. For organisms adapted to these waters, this structure provides a steady source of sustenance. The availability of food aligns with the conditions that support their physiology, allowing them to maintain balance within a system that remains productive despite its apparent simplicity. The abundance of oxygen, reinforced by the activity of phytoplankton, supports processes that depend on continuous exchange. The blooms themselves follow patterns shaped by light and nutrient availability, expanding when conditions allow and receding when they change. Even as they diminish, their influence remains, leaving behind a reservoir of organic material that continues to circulate through the system. The ocean retains the imprint of their presence, carrying forward the effects of their growth. Within this network, each component contributes to the stability of the whole. The microscopic and the vast are linked through processes that repeat with quiet consistency. The production of oxygen, the formation of swarms, and the movement of energy through the food web all unfold within a framework that has persisted over long periods. The result is an environment where life is supported not by a single source, but by the continuous interaction of many. The blooms provide the initial pulse, the krill extend it, and the broader ecosystem sustains it, creating a balance that allows organisms to persist within conditions that remain otherwise challenging. In this layered system, the abundance of oxygen and the steady supply of food form a foundation that supports the unique adaptations found here. Each cycle of growth reinforces the next, maintaining a quiet continuity that underlies the entire Antarctic marine world. Motion here unfolds at a different pace, shaped not by urgency, but by a steady conservation of energy that defines every action. Within this environment, the demands placed on the body are met through restraint rather than speed, allowing life to continue in a rhythm that appears almost suspended. Metabolism settles into a lower range, reducing the rate at which energy is consumed. Chemical reactions within cells proceed more slowly, guided by temperatures that temper activity without halting it. Each process continues with quiet consistency, sustaining the organism without excess expenditure. The body requires less fuel and, in turn, draws less from the resources around it. This reduction influences movement in subtle ways. Muscles contract without haste, producing motion that is measured and deliberate. There is no need for rapid bursts or prolonged exertion. Instead, the body glides through the water with minimal effort, aligning its pace with the surrounding currents that carry it forward. Swimming becomes a form of drifting, guided as much by the environment as by the organism itself. Fins adjust gently, making small corrections rather than forceful strokes. The path through the water follows a line of least resistance, allowing motion to occur with limited energy loss. Each movement blends into the next, creating a continuous flow that avoids abrupt changes. Energy efficiency emerges from this balance between internal demand and external support. With metabolic rates reduced, the need for constant intake diminishes. The organism can sustain itself on intervals that would not be sufficient elsewhere, drawing from available resources without depleting them rapidly. The body maintains its functions with a quiet economy, preserving energy for when it is required. Circulation, respiration, and movement all reflect this slower tempo. The systems within the body remain active, yet their activity is distributed over longer periods. Nothing is rushed, and nothing is forced beyond what is necessary. The organism exists within a range that allows it to persist without strain, adapting its pace to match the conditions around it. The surrounding water contributes to this dynamic. Currents move with steady direction, providing a gentle framework within which motion can occur. By aligning with these flows, the organism reduces the need for active propulsion. It becomes part of the movement of the environment, carried along while maintaining its own course through subtle adjustments. This style of living does not imply inactivity, but rather a different approach to activity itself. The body remains responsive, capable of movement and change, yet it avoids unnecessary expenditure. Each action is measured against the cost it carries, resulting in a pattern that favors sustainability over speed. Over time, this approach shapes the overall behavior of the organism. Feeding, movement, and interaction with the environment all follow the same principle of efficiency. The organism takes what it needs without excess, moves when required, and remains still when movement offers no advantage. The balance between action and rest becomes finely tuned. In this slower rhythm, the boundary between motion and stillness softens. The organism drifts, adjusts, and continues, maintaining its presence within the water without drawing attention to its movement. The pace remains constant, unhurried, aligned with the steady conditions that define its world. The result is a form of life that persists through moderation. By reducing demand and aligning with the environment, the organism sustains itself within a system that favors continuity over intensity. Its movement, its metabolism, and its energy use all reflect a quiet adaptation to a world where survival depends not on speed, but on balance. Stillness becomes a method rather than an absence, a way of existing that allows the body to merge quietly with the slow movement of the surrounding water. In this state, the organism does not pursue with urgency, nor does it expend energy in prolonged search. Instead, it settles into a position where waiting becomes the central act. The body holds itself in place with minimal effort, supported by broad pectoral fins that extend outward like gentle wings. These fins do not beat rapidly, but adjust in small, controlled movements, maintaining balance within the water column. By shifting their angle and tension, the organism hovers, neither sinking nor rising, sustained in a calm suspension. Within this posture, motion is reduced to subtle corrections. The surrounding currents pass by, carrying with them small particles and drifting life. The organism remains aligned with these flows, allowing potential prey to move within reach rather than seeking it out through active pursuit. The environment, in this sense, becomes part of the hunting process. Krill, carried in loose formations or scattered groups, pass through these spaces as they follow their own patterns of movement. Small fish, too, drift within this system, their paths shaped by the same currents that guide everything in these waters. The predator does not disrupt this movement but waits within it, maintaining a presence that does not draw attention. When prey comes close enough, the response is measured and precise. A brief adjustment of the body, a controlled extension, and the distance is closed without sudden force. The action is efficient, using only the energy required to secure the meal. There is no prolonged chase, no rapid acceleration, only a short transition from stillness to capture. This approach aligns with the broader pattern of energy conservation. By avoiding continuous movement, the organism reduces the demand placed on its body. Each successful feeding event provides enough to sustain it for extended periods, allowing it to remain in its quiet state without the need for frequent intake. Time between meals can stretch across weeks, supported by the low metabolic demands that define its physiology. The body processes what it has gathered slowly, extracting energy with care and distributing it across its systems. The absence of urgency in feeding reflects the absence of urgency in all aspects of its existence. The hovering posture remains central to this method. The large pectoral fins provide stability, allowing the organism to hold its position with minimal effort. They act not as instruments of speed, but as tools for balance, enabling the body to remain poised within the water for long durations. This form of hunting depends on patience and alignment rather than force. The organism becomes part of the environment's rhythm, its presence integrated into the slow movement of the surrounding sea. Prey encounters occur not through pursuit, but through proximity, guided by the natural flow of life within these waters. Over time, this strategy proves consistent with the conditions that define the region. The abundance of small organisms, carried by currents and supported by the broader ecosystem, provides opportunities that do not require active searching. The organism's role is to remain ready, to respond when those opportunities arise. In this quiet exchange between predator and environment, the act of hunting becomes an extension of stillness. Movement is brief and purposeful, framed by long periods of calm. The organism sustains itself through a balance of patience and precision, maintaining its place within a system that favors efficiency over speed. In the dim season, when light withdraws for long stretches, reproduction continues beneath the surface, unfolding in a rhythm that follows the quiet stability of the environment rather than the cycles seen elsewhere. During winter, when the upper world is held in darkness and the surface layers remain still, spawning begins, carried out with a precision shaped by long familiarity with these conditions. Eggs are released and settle into sheltered spaces along the seafloor, often among subtle contours that provide protection from movement above. These sites remain undisturbed for extended periods, allowing the early stages of development to proceed without interruption. The surrounding water, steady in temperature, creates a consistent setting in which growth can unfold slowly and evenly. In some species, males remain near these clusters of eggs, maintaining a presence that serves as a form of protection. Their role is not active in the sense of constant motion, but steady and enduring. They hover close to the developing embryos, adjusting their position with small movements, ensuring that the eggs remain within a stable microenvironment. This guarding behavior supports the conditions required for development. By remaining nearby, the male reduces the likelihood of disturbance, maintaining a calm space where the eggs can continue their gradual transformation. The interaction is subtle, defined more by constancy than by action, yet it contributes to the continuity of the next generation. Within each egg, development proceeds at a measured pace. The cold environment slows cellular processes, extending the time required for growth. Embryos form gradually, their structures emerging over weeks and months rather than days. This extended period allows for careful formation, each stage unfolding in alignment with the steady conditions of the surrounding water. The eggs remain intact through this prolonged development, their outer layers providing protection while allowing necessary exchange with the environment. Oxygen diffuses inward, supporting the slow progression of life within, while waste products move outward. The balance between internal growth and external conditions remains stable throughout this phase. When development reaches completion, the larvae emerge into the surrounding water, entering a world that continues to move at the same measured pace. These early stages of life are carried by currents, drifting over distances that extend far beyond their point of origin. The movement is passive, guided by the flow of water rather than active swimming. This larval drift can continue for long periods, spreading individuals across wide areas. As they move, they encounter different parts of the coastal environment, each offering variations in conditions that influence their development. The dispersal allows the population to maintain its presence across the broader region, linking distant areas through shared origins. During this phase, the young remain small and lightly formed, their structures still developing as they drift. The environment provides what is needed, sustaining them through the same abundance that supports adult life. Over time, they grow into more defined forms, gradually transitioning from drifting larvae to independent individuals. The entire process, from spawning to early development, reflects the same pattern seen throughout this system. There is no urgency, no rapid progression, only a steady unfolding that aligns with the conditions that surround it. Each stage takes place within a framework that favors continuity and balance over speed. In this quiet cycle, the next generation is carried forward, shaped by the same environment that shaped those before it. The eggs, the guarding presence, and the drifting larvae all contribute to a process that sustains the lineage without disruption, maintaining its place within a world defined by stability and slow, persistent change. Growth unfolds here as a gradual unfolding rather than a rapid ascent, shaped by conditions that temper every process within the body. From the earliest stages of life, development proceeds at a pace that reflects the surrounding cold, where time stretches and each change takes longer to complete. The body forms not through quick transformation, but through steady, incremental progression. Cells divide more slowly, guided by temperatures that reduce the speed of biochemical reactions. Proteins assemble, tissues differentiate, and structures take shape, all at a rate that extends the journey from youth to adulthood. What might occur within months elsewhere expands into years, each stage carefully aligned with the limits imposed by the environment. This extended timeline leads to maturity arriving later, typically between 4 to 5 years after the organism first emerges. During this period, growth remains continuous but restrained, adding mass and complexity in measured amounts. The body refines itself over time, reaching a functional balance that supports survival within its specific conditions. Energy use during this process follows a pattern of careful allocation. The organism cannot afford excess expenditure, and so each phase of growth is supported by resources that are gathered and used with precision. Nutrients are directed toward essential development, while non-critical processes remain limited, ensuring that energy is preserved where it is most needed. The surrounding environment reinforces this approach. With lower temperatures slowing metabolic activity, the demand for constant intake is reduced. The organism can sustain itself with less frequent feeding, drawing from stored energy reserves when necessary. This balance allows growth to continue even when external resources are not immediately available. As the body approaches maturity, its systems stabilize into the same patterns that will define its adult life. Movement remains measured, circulation steady, and respiration aligned with the conditions of the water. The organism does not transition into a phase of increased intensity, but maintains the same calm consistency that has guided its development. Lifespan extends up to 15 years, a duration that reflects both the slow pace of growth and the stability of the environment. Over this time, the organism moves through its life stages without sharp transitions, each phase blending into the next. Aging occurs gradually, marked by subtle changes rather than abrupt shifts. The concept of energy budgeting remains central throughout this lifespan. Every action, from movement to maintenance, is balanced against the available resources. The organism operates within a narrow margin where efficiency determines longevity. By minimizing unnecessary expenditure, it preserves its capacity to sustain essential functions over time. This careful balance extends to internal processes as well. repair and maintenance occur steadily, ensuring that tissues remain functional despite the slow pace of renewal. The body invests in preserving its integrity, directing energy toward processes that support long-term survival rather than short bursts of activity. The environment, consistent in its conditions, allows this pattern to persist without disruption. There are no sudden shifts that demand rapid adaptation, no extreme variations that force the organism to accelerate its development. Instead, the steady cold provides a framework within which life can proceed at its own measured pace. In this setting, growth becomes an expression of alignment rather than competition. The organism develops in harmony with its surroundings, its timeline shaped by the same forces that define its existence. Each year adds to its structure and function, building toward a maturity that reflects the balance it has maintained since its earliest stages. The result is a life that unfolds slowly, sustained by careful management of energy and guided by conditions that favor continuity over speed. Within this framework, growth is not rushed but allowed to proceed with quiet persistence, forming a body adapted to endure within a world where time itself seems to move more gently. Not every adaptation unfolds without constraint, and within this body, the absence that allowed survival also sets quiet limits on what can be done. The systems that sustain life operate with careful balance, yet they do not extend far beyond the conditions that shaped them. There is little room for excess, little capacity for sudden change. At moments when rapid movement might be required, the body reveals its boundaries. Muscles can contract and propel the organism forward, yet the intensity of that effort cannot be sustained for long. The supply of oxygen, carried in a more diffuse form, reaches its limit quickly when demand rises. What is available under steady conditions becomes insufficient when activity increases sharply. This creates a ceiling on peak performance. The organism is not built for bursts of speed or prolonged exertion. Its strength lies in consistency rather than power, in the ability to maintain function over time rather than to exceed it briefly. When pushed beyond this range, the balance between supply and demand shifts, and the body responds by slowing once more. Recovery follows the same measured pace. After a period of exertion, the system requires time to restore equilibrium. Oxygen levels within tissues must be replenished gradually, carried through the same pathways that support all other processes. There is no rapid return to heightened activity, only a steady reestablishment of the conditions that allow the organism to continue. This dependence on stable oxygen levels extends beyond moments of movement. The entire physiology is tuned to an environment where oxygen remains consistently available. Fluctuations that might be tolerated elsewhere become more significant here, as the system lacks the reserve capacity provided by more concentrated transport mechanisms. When oxygen levels decline, even slightly, the effects ripple through the body. Processes that depend on continuous supply begin to slow, and the margin for maintaining normal function narrows. The organism relies on the surrounding water to provide what it cannot store in large quantities, tying its internal stability closely to external conditions. This connection shapes the range of environments in which it can exist. The organism remains confined to areas where oxygen availability remains high and consistent, where temperature and other factors do not disrupt the balance it depends on. Outside these conditions, the limitations of its physiology become more pronounced, reducing its ability to persist. The narrow environmental range reflects a trade-off embedded within its design. The adaptations that allow survival in one setting restrict flexibility in others. The body functions well within its defined space, yet does not extend easily beyond it. This specialization anchors the organism to a particular set of conditions, shaping both its distribution and its behavior. Within these boundaries, the organism continues to operate effectively, its systems aligned with the environment that supports them. The limitations do not prevent survival, but they define the terms under which it occurs. Movement remains measured, activity remains moderate, and reliance on stable conditions persists throughout its life. The absence of concentrated oxygen carriers, once seen as a loss, becomes part of a broader balance that includes both advantage and constraint. It allows certain pathways to function in ways that differ from the usual pattern, yet it also imposes limits that cannot be exceeded without consequence. In this interplay between capacity and restriction, the organism maintains its place within the system that shaped it. Its life unfolds within a narrow margin, sustained by conditions that remain steady and predictable. The cost of its adaptation is not failure, but a quiet boundary, one that defines how far its abilities can reach while still allowing it to endure. Change arrives here not with sudden force, but as a gradual shift in the character of the water itself, altering properties that have long remained steady. As temperatures rise, even slightly, the behavior of dissolved gases begins to change. Oxygen, once held in generous amounts, becomes less soluble, its presence within the water diminishing as warmth increases. This shift unfolds quietly, without visible disturbance. The currents continue their motion, the surface remains calm, yet the composition of the water alters in ways that ripple through every level of the system. The balance that once supported a particular set of conditions begins to move, creating a new context for life within these regions. Across the Southern Ocean, observations have traced a slow warming trend, subtle in magnitude but persistent over time. The changes are not uniform, varying across different areas, yet they share a common direction. Temperatures rise by small increments, enough to influence the delicate equilibrium that has defined this environment for millions of years. As the water warms, the capacity to hold oxygen decreases, reducing the overall availability within the surrounding medium. For many organisms, this shift remains within a range that can be tolerated. Their systems adjust, drawing from reserves or altering their activity to match the new conditions. For others, particularly those closely aligned with the previous balance, the change carries greater consequence. Within bodies that rely on a steady and abundant supply of dissolved oxygen, even modest reductions begin to matter. The flow of oxygen into tissues becomes less consistent, narrowing the margin that supports normal function. Processes that once operated with ease now require more careful balance, and the system adjusts by reducing activity further. Signs of strain appear in subtle ways. Movement becomes more restrained, recovery from exertion takes longer, and the overall capacity for sustained function begins to decline. The organism does not fail abruptly, but shifts into a state where its limits are reached more quickly than before. This sensitivity reflects a deeper aspect of its design. The adaptations that allowed it to thrive within a stable, oxygen-rich environment also tie it closely to those exact conditions. Its physiology does not carry large reserves or flexible mechanisms to compensate for significant change. Instead, it operates within a narrow range where balance can be maintained. As the surrounding water moves beyond that range, the organism faces increasing constraint. The same features that once provided efficiency now contribute to vulnerability, as there is little capacity to extend beyond the conditions for which it is optimized. The environment and the body, once aligned, begin to diverge. The broader system also responds to these changes, Shifts in temperature influence the distribution of species, the timing of biological cycles, and the movement of nutrients through the water. These adjustments ripple outward, altering the context in which each organism exists. The balance between different forms of life begins to shift, guided by the same underlying change in temperature. Within this evolving setting, the organism continues to persist where conditions remain within its range, yet its presence becomes more closely tied to specific areas where the original balance is still maintained. Its distribution reflects the boundaries imposed by its own physiology, shaped by a reliance on conditions that no longer remain constant across the entire region. In this quiet transition, the relationship between organism and environment reveals its depth. Adaptation provides a path to survival within a defined context, yet it also creates a dependence on that context. When the environment changes, even gradually, the boundaries of that adaptation become more visible, outlining the space within which life can continue. The water, once a stable medium, carries within it a new set of conditions. The shift remains gentle in its onset, yet its effects extend through every layer of the system, reshaping the balance that has long defined this world. Long before these waters were closely studied, they were entered for extraction, their resources drawn upward by vessels that moved steadily across the surface. Early commercial fishing extended into Antarctic regions with limited understanding of the systems below, guided by the presence of abundant life that appeared, at first glance, resilient and inexhaustible. Icefish became part of this activity, taken in numbers during periods when harvesting intensified. Their presence along the continental shelf made them accessible to fleets operating in these cold waters, and for a time, they were gathered alongside other species that occupied similar depths. The removal was not immediate in its effects, yet it introduced a new factor into an environment that had long remained relatively undisturbed. Fishing pressure overlapped with broader patterns of resource use, particularly as attention turned toward krill. These small crustaceans, forming dense swarms across large areas, became a target for their potential as a global resource. Harvesting of krill expanded, drawing from the same foundation that supports many organisms within this system. The connection between these fisheries is not direct in a simple sense, yet it exists through the shared reliance on the same underlying structure. Krill serve as a primary source of energy for numerous species, linking microscopic production to larger forms of life. When their numbers are reduced in localized areas, the effects can move outward, influencing the availability of food for those that depend on them. For icefish, this relationship becomes part of a broader set of pressures. Their feeding patterns align with the presence of krill and smaller organisms supported by the same system. Changes in the distribution or abundance of these resources alter the conditions under which they sustain themselves, adding another layer of variability to an environment that had long remained stable. At the same time, the life history of these organisms shapes their ability to respond to such changes. Growth proceeds slowly, and reproduction unfolds over extended periods. The time required to reach maturity, combined with the gradual pace of development, means that population increases occur at a measured rate. Losses, whether from natural causes or external pressures, are not quickly replaced. This slower reproductive cycle creates a challenge for recovery. When numbers decline, the process of rebuilding takes place over years rather than seasons. Each generation contributes incrementally, and the return to previous levels depends on sustained conditions that allow growth without interruption. Human activity introduces fluctuations that can disrupt this process. Harvesting, even when managed, adds a variable that interacts with the natural dynamics of the system. The balance between removal and renewal becomes more delicate, requiring careful attention to maintain stability over time. Efforts to regulate fishing have developed in response to these challenges, guided by a growing understanding of the interconnected nature of the ecosystem. Measures are implemented to limit extraction and monitor populations, aiming to preserve the conditions that support long-term continuity. These approaches reflect a recognition that the system operates within narrow margins where changes can have lasting effects. Within this evolving context, the presence of icefish remains tied to both the natural structure of the environment and the influences introduced by human activity. Their populations continue to exist within areas where conditions remain favorable, yet their stability depends on factors that extend beyond their immediate control. The interaction between organism and environment now includes an additional layer, one shaped by decisions made far above the water. The quiet persistence of these fish continues, yet it unfolds within a system that is no longer entirely isolated, where external pressures intersect with the slow rhythms that have defined this world for millions of years. Across the wider ocean, other solutions to the movement of oxygen take shape, each one reflecting a different balance between chemistry and environment. Not all blood carries the same color, nor does it rely on the same molecules. In many crustaceans, the circulating fluid appears pale blue, its hue emerging from a copper-based compound known as hemocyanin. This molecule binds oxygen in a manner distinct from hemoglobin, using copper atoms at its core rather than iron. When oxygen is present, the fluid takes on a faint blue tone, shifting back toward transparency as oxygen is released. The process remains reversible, allowing these organisms to transport oxygen through their bodies, though with different efficiencies and constraints. Hemocyanin operates freely within the plasma, rather than being enclosed within specialized cells. It dissolves directly into the circulating fluid, creating a system where oxygen transport occurs, without the dense packing seen in red blood cells. This arrangement suits the needs of many invertebrates whose metabolic demands and body structures align with a more diffuse method of delivery. Compared to hemoglobin, hemocyanin generally binds oxygen less tightly and carries it in lower concentrations. Yet, within the contexts where it evolved, these differences do not hinder survival. The surrounding conditions, combined with the physiology of the organisms themselves, support a balance that allows this alternative system to function effectively. Within vertebrates, hemoglobin remains the dominant solution, refined over long periods into a highly efficient mechanism for oxygen transport. Its presence across a wide range of species reflects its adaptability, supporting activity levels that vary from slow drifting to rapid movement. The concentration of hemoglobin within red blood cells allows for precise control over oxygen delivery, meeting the demands of tissues that require consistent supply. Against this broader pattern, the condition seen in Antarctic icefish stands apart. Rather than replacing hemoglobin with an alternative molecule, the system operates without a specialized carrier entirely. Oxygen remains dissolved within the plasma, its movement supported by environmental abundance and structural adaptations within the body. This absence represents an extreme case among vertebrates, where the usual reliance on concentrated transport has been set aside. The system functions within a narrow set of conditions, supported by factors that do not extend broadly across other environments. It reflects a path shaped by specific circumstances rather than a widely applicable strategy. Elsewhere, there are rare instances where a similar loss has occurred independently. Certain species of Asian noodlefish have also lost functional hemoglobin, their systems relying on dissolved oxygen within the plasma. These cases remain uncommon and are typically associated with environments that share certain supportive characteristics, allowing such a condition to persist. The comparison between these systems highlights the diversity of solutions that have emerged across different lineages. Hemoglobin, hemocyanin, and the absence of both represent distinct approaches to the same fundamental challenge. Each one reflects a balance between molecular structure, environmental conditions, and the physiological needs of the organism. As the perspective widens, the emphasis shifts from contrast to continuity. These variations do not exist in isolation, but form part of a broader pattern in which life adapts to the circumstances it encounters. The differences between them reveal how the same requirement can be met through multiple pathways, each aligned with a particular set of conditions. Within this gradual slowing of pace, the focus rests on the quiet interplay between chemistry and environment. The movement of oxygen, though essential, does not follow a single design. It unfolds through forms that vary in structure and efficiency, yet all serve the same purpose within the contexts that sustain them. Light does not follow a simple rise and fall here, but stretches and recedes across long intervals, shaping a rhythm that feels detached from the usual passage of day and night. During certain periods, brightness lingers for extended hours, filtering down through layers of water, while at other times, darkness settles in and remains, broken only by faint traces that never fully return to daylight. These cycles do not move quickly. They unfold across seasons, guiding patterns that influence everything beneath the surface. The transition from light to darkness is gradual, allowing the ecosystem to adjust without sudden change. Organisms respond not to sharp boundaries, but to slow shifts in illumination that alter the character of their environment. Beneath the ice, this rhythm becomes even more muted. The surface forms a barrier that diffuses incoming light, scattering it before it reaches the water below. What passes through arrives softened, reduced in intensity, yet still sufficient to sustain the processes that depend on it. The ice itself becomes part of the system, shaping how energy enters and moves through the environment. Within this filtered light, under-ice ecosystems take form. Microorganisms gather along the lower surfaces of the ice, using the available light to sustain their growth. These communities remain attached to the ice itself, forming a thin, living layer that persists as long as conditions allow. They contribute to the broader network of life, linking the surface boundary to the deeper water below. As the seasons progress, the extent and structure of the ice change, altering the flow of light and the distribution of these communities. When ice thickens, less light passes through and activity slows. When it thins or recedes, light penetrates more freely, supporting renewed growth. The system responds in quiet synchrony, adjusting to each phase without abrupt transitions. Currents move steadily beneath this cover, guiding the circulation of water in patterns that remain consistent over time. These movements are not turbulent but measured, carrying nutrients, oxygen, and organisms along paths that repeat with subtle variation. The flow connects different regions, ensuring that resources are distributed across the system. For organisms within this environment, these currents provide both stability and connection. They carry food, transport larvae, and maintain the conditions that support respiration and growth. The movement of water becomes a constant presence, shaping the rhythm of life without imposing sudden change. The absence of strong daily variation creates a different sense of time. Without a clear division between day and night, activity does not follow a strict cycle. Instead, it aligns with longer patterns, responding to the gradual shifts in light and the steady flow of the environment. Movement, feeding, and rest occur within this broader framework, guided by conditions that remain relatively constant over shorter periods. Within this setting, the organism continues its quiet existence, its behavior integrated into the slow rhythm that defines the region. The changes in light influence its surroundings, yet do not disrupt the balance it maintains. It moves, feeds, and rests within a system that emphasizes continuity over variation. The interplay between light, ice, and water creates a layered environment, each component influencing the others in subtle ways. The ice filters light, the currents distribute resources, and the organisms respond to these combined effects. The result is a rhythm that unfolds steadily, shaping life beneath the surface without the sharp contrasts seen elsewhere. In this extended cycle, time itself seems to stretch, allowing processes to occur with a measured pace. The environment remains consistent, guided by patterns that repeat over long intervals, sustaining a system where life continues in alignment with the quiet movement of light and water. Above the quiet movement of the water, a shifting layer forms and dissolves with the passing of seasons, shaping the world beneath in ways that extend far beyond its surface. Sea ice does not remain fixed in a single state, but grows, fractures, drifts, and recedes, creating a dynamic boundary that influences the conditions below it. When this layer thickens, it acts as a shield against the forces that move across the open ocean. Storms that would otherwise disturb the water are softened by its presence, their energy dispersed before reaching the depths beneath. The surface becomes more stable, and the water below remains calm, protected from the turbulence that could disrupt the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Within this sheltered environment, life finds a space where early stages can unfold with reduced disturbance. The underside of the ice, with its irregular surfaces and small pockets, provides areas where developing organisms can exist with a degree of protection. These spaces serve as nursery grounds, where eggs and young forms encounter fewer disruptions from external forces. The structure of the ice creates a variety of microhabitats, each with slightly different conditions. Some areas allow more light to pass through, while others remain dim. Small variations in temperature and flow create niches that support different forms of life. Within these spaces, early development can proceed in alignment with the steady conditions that define the region. As seasons shift and the ice begins to thin or break apart, another process unfolds. The melting releases nutrients that had been held within the ice structure, returning them to the surrounding water. These nutrients contribute to the broader system, supporting growth in organisms that depend on their availability. The release does not occur all at once, but gradually, as the ice transitions from one state to another. This slow return of nutrients aligns with the cycles of growth that shape the ecosystem, providing a steady input that supports continued activity. The water absorbs these materials, distributing them through currents that carry them across the region. In this way, sea ice becomes both a barrier and a source, influencing conditions through its presence and its transformation. While intact, it protects and stabilizes. As it melts, it contributes to the flow of resources that sustain life below. Each phase of its existence plays a role in maintaining the balance of the system. The organisms within this environment adapt to these changes, aligning their life cycles with the presence and absence of the ice. Early stages of development take advantage of the protection it offers, while later stages benefit from the increased availability of nutrients that follow its retreat. The timing of these processes remains closely tied to the seasonal patterns that define the region. Currents continue to move beneath this layer, carrying the effects of the ice across different areas. The influence of a single region can extend outward, linking distant parts of the ecosystem through the movement of water and dissolved materials. The role of the ice, therefore, reaches beyond its immediate location, contributing to a broader network of interactions. Over time, this interplay between ice, water, and life creates a system that remains both stable and dynamic. The presence of the ice moderates external forces, while its transformation introduces variation that supports growth and renewal. The balance between these aspects allows the ecosystem to persist within conditions that might otherwise be too extreme. In this layered environment, the ice stands as a quiet influence, shaping the rhythm of life beneath without direct movement of its own. Its cycles define moments of protection and release, guiding processes that continue steadily within the calm waters below. Within the vessels that branch through the body, movement takes on a quality closer to that of the surrounding sea, as if the internal fluid mirrors the medium beyond the skin. Without the density introduced by cellular components, the circulating plasma remains thin, its texture allowing it to pass through the body with minimal resistance. This reduction in viscosity alters the effort required to maintain circulation. Each contraction of the heart sends the fluid forward, and because it flows more easily, less force is needed to keep it moving. The pathways through which it travels, from larger vessels to the finest capillaries, offer less opposition, allowing the current to remain steady without demanding excessive energy. In colder conditions, this property becomes especially significant. Fluids generally thicken as temperatures fall, increasing the effort required to move them through confined spaces. Here, the absence of dense components prevents that thickening from becoming a limiting factor. The plasma retains its fluidity, maintaining a consistency that supports continuous motion even as the environment remains cold. The vessels themselves align with this quality, forming a network that accommodates the smooth passage of fluid. Their walls remain flexible, capable of adjusting to the steady flow without strain. The interaction between fluid and vessel becomes a balanced exchange, where movement is guided rather than forced, and the system operates with a quiet efficiency. As the plasma travels, it carries dissolved oxygen and other essential substances, distributing them throughout the body. The ease of movement ensures that this distribution occurs without interruption, maintaining the internal balance required for cellular processes. Each passage through the system reinforces the connection between flow and function, linking the physical properties of the fluid to the needs of the organism. Energy conservation emerges naturally from this arrangement. With lower resistance, the heart does not need to exert as much effort to sustain circulation. The reduction in workload contributes to the overall efficiency of the system, allowing energy to be directed toward other processes that support survival. The body operates within a framework where each component contributes to minimizing unnecessary expenditure. This efficiency does not rely on rapid movement or high pressure. Instead, it depends on continuity, on the ability of the fluid to move freely and consistently through the network of vessels. The flow remains unbroken, adapting to the demands of the body without requiring sudden changes in force or direction. The relationship between fluid and environment extends beyond simple similarity. The internal circulation reflects the properties of the surrounding water, creating a parallel between the organism and its habitat. Both exist within a state where movement is governed by gentle forces, where resistance is low, and continuity is maintained. Over time, this alignment becomes integral to the organism's physiology. The thinness of the plasma is not merely a consequence of absence, but a feature that supports the entire system. It allows circulation to remain effective within conditions that might otherwise hinder movement, ensuring that essential processes continue without disruption. The vessels, the heart, and the fluid itself form a coordinated system, each part contributing to the ease with which circulation occurs. The reduction in viscosity, the flexibility of the pathways, and the steady rhythm of movement all combine to create a flow that resembles water more than traditional blood. In this quiet circulation, the body sustains itself through simplicity. The fluid moves with minimal resistance, guided by structures that support its passage, maintaining a balance that reflects the conditions of the environment. The result is a system where efficiency arises not from complexity, but from the seamless movement of a medium that flows as easily as the sea around it. Across long stretches of time, change does not always arrive as addition. Sometimes it moves in the opposite direction, easing away structures that once seemed essential, leaving behind a system that functions with fewer parts. In this quiet process, absence becomes as meaningful as presence, shaping the form of life through what is no longer there. Within the lineage we have followed, this pattern unfolds with particular clarity. The removal of complex components did not halt development, nor did it reverse the course of survival. Instead, it opened a different path, one where the body reorganized around what remained, allowing function to continue without restoring what had been lost. Evolution, in this sense, does not seek complexity for its own sake. It responds to conditions, preserving traits that align with the environment and allowing others to fade when they no longer provide advantage. The result is not a steady increase in intricacy, but a shifting balance between addition and subtraction, guided by the demands of survival. Simplicity emerges as a form of adaptation, not through reduction alone, but through alignment. When certain structures are no longer required, their absence can reduce the burden placed on the organism. Fewer components mean fewer processes to maintain, fewer resources to allocate, and fewer points of strain within the system. Energy, which must be gathered and distributed carefully, becomes central to this balance. Each structure within the body carries a cost, requiring resources for its creation, maintenance, and function. When a component is removed, that cost disappears, allowing energy to be redirected toward other processes that support survival within the given conditions. This redistribution does not weaken the organism. Instead, it refines the way energy flows through its systems, concentrating it where it is most effective. The body becomes streamlined, its functions supported by what is necessary rather than by what is possible. The absence of certain features becomes part of a broader efficiency. Over time, this efficiency stabilizes. The organism operates within a framework that reflects both its history and its environment, its form shaped by what has been retained and what has been lost. The result is not a diminished version of a more complex ancestor, but a distinct configuration, adapted to a specific set of conditions. The idea that loss can lead to adaptation challenges the assumption that evolution always moves toward greater complexity. In many cases, removing a feature allows the organism to function more effectively within its environment. The reduction of unnecessary components can simplify processes, making them more reliable and less demanding. This principle extends beyond a single trait. Across the body, structures and systems reflect a balance between what is needed and what can be set aside. The organism becomes a product of this balance, its form shaped by the interplay between retention, and removal. Within this perspective, absence is not a failure but a transformation. What has been removed leaves space for other adjustments, allowing the organism to align more closely with the conditions that surround it. The system becomes coherent in a new way, defined by the relationships between its remaining parts. The environment plays a constant role in this process, guiding which traits persist and which do not. As conditions remain stable, certain features become less necessary, and their absence becomes part of the organism's design. The body reflects this ongoing interaction, its structure shaped by both internal changes and external influences. In this gradual unfolding, evolution reveals a quieter dimension. It does not always build upward, adding layers of complexity, but can also move towards simplicity, refining life through subtraction. The organism that emerges carries within it the history of these changes, its form shaped as much by what is gone as by what remains. Perfection, when it emerges within a stable world, often carries a quiet limitation, shaping a form that fits its environment so closely that even small changes begin to matter. The alignment between organism and surroundings becomes precise, refined over long periods, yet that same precision narrows the space within which life can continue unchanged. Within this body, every system reflects that close fit. Circulation, respiration, and energy use operate within a range that matches the surrounding conditions with remarkable accuracy. The balance is steady, maintained through structures and processes that depend on the consistency of what lies beyond the organism itself. This dependence creates a narrow tolerance range. The body functions well when temperature, oxygen, availability, and other factors remain within familiar bounds. As long as these conditions hold, the organism maintains its rhythm, its systems aligned and efficient. Outside that range, even gradual shifts begin to alter the balance. Oxygen saturation becomes a central point of sensitivity. The internal processes that sustain life rely on a continuous supply that meets demand without interruption. When the surrounding water holds oxygen at expected levels, the system remains stable. If those levels decline, the margin for maintaining function diminishes, and the body adjusts by reducing activity. This adjustment reflects a deeper constraint. The organism does not carry extensive reserves or alternative pathways that allow it to compensate for significant variation. Its physiology is built around the assumption of steady conditions, and when those conditions change, its responses remain limited by that design. Temperature influences this sensitivity in subtle ways. As the surrounding water shifts, the relationship between oxygen availability and metabolic demand changes as well. Warmer conditions increase the need for oxygen while simultaneously reducing its presence in the environment. This combination places additional strain on a system already operating within narrow limits. The organism responds through moderation, slowing movement and conserving energy, yet these adjustments cannot fully offset the change. The balance that once held with ease becomes more difficult to maintain, and the range of conditions under which the organism can function begins to contract. Climate introduces a broader dimension to this sensitivity. Long-term shifts in temperature and environmental stability alter the foundation upon which these adaptations were built. What once remained consistent over extended periods now shows signs of variation, introducing a level of uncertainty into a system that has long depended on predictability. Within this evolving context, the organism remains closely tied to specific areas where conditions still align with its needs. Its distribution reflects the boundaries of its tolerance, confined to regions where oxygen saturation and temperature remain within the range that supports its physiology. Beyond these areas, the limits of adaptation become more apparent. The precision that defines its form does not diminish its ability to survive within those boundaries. Instead, it emphasizes the relationship between specialization and constraint. The organism thrives where conditions remain stable, yet its capacity to extend beyond those conditions remains limited. This interplay between fit and fragility reveals a quieter aspect of adaptation. Success within a particular environment does not always translate to flexibility across many. The closer the alignment, the more dependent the organism becomes on the persistence of that environment. In this balance, the organism continues its steady existence, sustained by conditions that have shaped it over long periods. Its systems remain finely tuned, its processes aligned with the surrounding world, yet its range remains defined by the same precision that allows it to endure. The result is a form of life that carries both strength and sensitivity, its survival linked to the continuity of the environment that supports it. Some places seem to move forward with the rest of the world, shifting with each passing era, while others hold a quieter continuity, preserving conditions that have changed little across immense spans of time. Antarctica exists within this second pattern, its surrounding waters maintaining a steadiness that allows life to unfold along paths rarely seen elsewhere. The long-term stability of this region does not mean stillness in the strict sense, but rather a persistence of underlying conditions. Temperature, circulation, and seasonal cycles remain within narrow bounds, repeating with a consistency that shapes the organisms living within them. Over millions of years, this steadiness has provided a foundation upon which evolution could proceed without frequent disruption. In many parts of the world, environmental changes arrive in waves, altering habitats and forcing rapid adaptation or disappearance. Here, the pace is different. Shifts occur slowly, allowing organisms to respond over extended periods, refining their forms in alignment with conditions that remain largely predictable. The result is a system where change is gradual and continuity remains intact. Within this framework, evolutionary pathways take on distinctive forms. Without the constant introduction of external influences, lineages develop in relative isolation, guided by the same set of conditions across generations. Traits that emerge are shaped by long-term interaction with the environment, rather than by short-term pressures that demand immediate adjustment. This isolation, combined with stability, allows for the persistence of adaptations that might not survive in more variable settings. Features that align closely with the environment can remain for extended periods, carried forward without interruption. Over time, these traits become defining characteristics embedded deeply within the lineage. The concept of a biological time capsule emerges from this combination of factors. The region preserves not only species, but also the conditions under which they evolved. The patterns seen today reflect processes that have been unfolding for millions of years, largely uninterrupted by the kinds of changes that reshape other ecosystems. Within this preserved setting, life continues to follow trajectories that diverge from those found elsewhere. The organisms here do not simply mirror their relatives in other parts of the world, but instead represent unique expressions of adaptation. Their forms, behaviors, and physiological systems carry the imprint of a long history shaped by consistent conditions. The slow rates of change reinforce this uniqueness. Evolution does not halt, but proceeds with a measured pace, allowing fine adjustments to accumulate over time. Each generation builds upon the last, refining traits that remain aligned with the environment. The absence of rapid shifts allows for a continuity that is rarely maintained over such long periods. This continuity extends across multiple levels of the ecosystem, From microscopic organisms to larger forms, each component reflects the same underlying stability. Interactions between species develop within this framework, creating relationships that persist across generations. The entire system operates as a cohesive whole, shaped by the same enduring conditions. The pathways that emerge from this setting are not easily replicated elsewhere. They depend on a combination of isolation, stability, and time, factors that together create a unique context for evolution. The organisms that arise within this system carry characteristics that reflect this rare alignment, distinguishing them from those found in more dynamic environments. In this quiet preservation, Antarctica holds a record of evolutionary processes that have unfolded with minimal interruption. The region becomes a living archive, its waters containing forms of life that illustrate how adaptation can proceed when conditions remain steady across vast spans of time. The result is a world where the past continues to shape the present in a direct and unbroken way, allowing life to persist along pathways that remain distinct, guided by the enduring stability of the environment. Color fades here not by accident, but through a gradual quieting of pigment, as if the body has chosen to step back from visibility rather than assert it. Within the tissues, the genetic instructions that once directed the production of darker tones have been reduced, their activity diminished over generations until only faint traces remain. What results is not a complete absence of color, but a soft neutrality, a surface that reflects little and absorbs even less. This reduction in pigmentation aligns closely with the character of the surrounding water. In these depths, light arrives already subdued, filtered through layers above and scattered by particles suspended within the sea. Strong contrasts become rare, and objects that reflect or absorb light too distinctly risk standing apart from their environment. By minimizing pigmentation, the body reduces its visual signature. It does not create a sharp outline against the background, but blends into the shifting tones that define the water around it. The edges soften, and the organism becomes less distinct, its presence merging with the subtle variations in light that move through the environment. This form of camouflage does not rely on pattern or rapid change. It emerges from the inherent properties of the body itself, a constant state that requires no adjustment once established. The organism remains quietly integrated into its surroundings, its appearance shaped by the same forces that define the light within the water. Light scattering plays a central role in this effect. As light travels through icy seas, it is redirected in multiple directions, diffused by the medium it passes through. This scattering reduces clarity, creating a visual field where forms appear softened and less defined. Within this context, a body with reduced pigmentation becomes even less noticeable, its features blending into the diffuse glow. The translucent qualities of the tissues contribute further to this integration. Rather than reflecting light strongly at the surface, the body allows it to pass through and disperse, diminishing the contrast between organism and environment. Internal structures remain faintly visible, yet they do not disrupt the overall effect of blending with the surrounding water. This strategy aligns with the broader pattern of energy conservation. Producing pigments requires resources, and in an environment where camouflage can be achieved through simplicity, the reduction of these processes becomes advantageous. The organism avoids the cost of maintaining complex coloration, directing its energy toward other functions that support survival. Over time, this reduction becomes embedded within the lineage, carried forward as a defining trait. The genes responsible for pigmentation remain present in altered forms, their activity limited by the conditions that shaped their expression. The body reflects this history, its appearance shaped by both genetic change and environmental influence. The effectiveness of this transparency depends on the consistency of the surrounding conditions. In waters where light remains subdued and scattering persists, the organism maintains its subtle presence. It does not need to adapt actively to each moment, but remains aligned with a setting that changes slowly and predictably. Within this environment, visibility becomes less about concealment through complexity and more about absence through simplicity. The organism does not hide in the traditional sense, but exists in a state where it is not easily distinguished from what surrounds it. Its form becomes part of the visual field, integrated into the same patterns of light and motion. In this quiet blending, the body reflects a broader principle, where adaptation emerges not through addition but through reduction. The loss of pigmentation becomes a means of alignment, allowing the organism to persist within a world where light itself is softened and presence is defined by subtlety rather than contrast. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself through speed or force, but through restraint, through systems that ask for little and therefore endure with quiet consistency. In this body, survival rests not on pushing against limits, but on remaining comfortably within them, where demand stays low and balance can be maintained without strain. Every movement reflects this principle. Muscles do not surge into rapid bursts of activity, but instead operate with measured, deliberate motion. The pace remains steady, aligned with the slow rhythms of the surrounding environment. Energy is not spent in sudden exertion, but distributed gently across time, allowing the organism to persist without exhausting its resources. At the center of this system, the heart continues its steady work, large in proportion, yet not hurried in its rhythm. Each contraction sends fluid through the body with a consistency that does not rely on force alone. The volume of flow compensates for what is absent, creating a circulation that remains effective through continuity rather than intensity. The thinness of the circulating fluid complements this design. Moving easily through vessels, it requires less effort to maintain its course. Resistance remains low, and the energy needed to sustain circulation stays within modest limits. The interaction between heart and fluid becomes a form of cooperation, each element supporting the other in maintaining steady flow. This synergy extends across the entire system. The heart provides volume, the fluid provides ease of movement, and together they create a circulation that aligns with the organism's low-demand lifestyle. There is no need for rapid delivery or sudden increases in output. Instead, the system operates within a range that supports gradual, continuous function. Energy conservation becomes the guiding principle. Resources are allocated carefully, directed toward processes that sustain life without excess. The organism does not accumulate large reserves for sudden activity, but maintains a steady balance that reduces the need for such reserves. Each function operates within limits that prevent unnecessary expenditure. This approach shapes behavior as well as physiology. Movement remains calm, interactions with the environment unfold without urgency, and feeding occurs in a manner that does not require constant effort. The organism exists within a rhythm that minimizes peaks and valleys, favoring consistency over intensity. Over time, this pattern reinforces itself. Systems that operate efficiently within low-demand conditions remain stable, while those that would require higher energy input do not persist. The result is a form of life that reflects the conditions around it, its processes aligned with an environment that favors steadiness over fluctuation. The advantage of this efficiency lies in its sustainability. By avoiding high energy demands, the organism reduces its dependence on variable resources. It does not need to compensate for sudden shortages or respond to rapid changes with equally rapid adjustments. Its survival strategy rests on maintaining equilibrium. This equilibrium is not static, but dynamic within a narrow range. Small adjustments occur as needed, yet they remain within limits that preserve the overall balance. The system responds without overextending, maintaining its integrity through subtle shifts rather than dramatic changes. In this quiet strength, the organism demonstrates a different approach to survival. It does not compete through speed or force, but endures through alignment with its environment, conserving energy and maintaining steady function. The combination of a large, steady heart and fluid that moves with ease forms the foundation of this approach, supporting a life that persists through efficiency. The result is a presence defined by continuity, where each part contributes to a system that asks little and, in doing so, is able to sustain itself over long periods without disruption. It moves without announcing itself, not by hiding behind obstacles, but by becoming so subtle that movement itself feels like a continuation of the water around it. There is no sharp boundary between body and environment, only a gentle shift in form that passes through the dimness with quiet continuity. The motion is unhurried, a slow drifting that follows the natural pathways of the surrounding currents. Fins adjust with small, deliberate movements, not to propel with force, but to guide direction, to remain balanced within a flow that already carries it forward. Each adjustment blends into the next, creating a rhythm that feels less like swimming and more like settling into the water's own pace. In the subdued light, the body holds a pale presence that does not draw attention. It neither reflects strongly nor absorbs deeply, existing in a narrow range of tones that echo the muted environment. Against the darker depths, it does not stand out sharply, but remains softly defined, its outline dissolving at the edges. This near invisibility is not absolute, but it is enough. The body does not need to vanish completely, only to reduce its presence to the point where it becomes part of the background, a quiet element within a larger scene. Movement does not disrupt this effect, but continues it, each motion aligned with the gentle shifts of the water. Time unfolds slowly here, and the organism follows that pace. There is no urgency in its actions, no sudden changes in direction or speed. Instead, it exists within a steady progression, its life carried forward by small, consistent movements that require little energy and produce little disturbance. The surrounding cold shapes this stillness. Processes within the body proceed at a measured rate, each function aligned with the temperature of the environment. The result is a life that unfolds without haste, where growth, movement, and interaction occur within extended intervals, stretched across time. In this setting, quiet becomes a defining characteristic. The organism does not rely on dominance or display, but on persistence, on the ability to remain present without drawing attention. Its existence is woven into the fabric of the environment, each moment connected to the next through continuity rather than change. There is a sense of calm in this arrangement, a stability that arises from alignment with the surrounding world. The organism does not resist its environment, but moves within it, its actions guided by the same forces that shape the water around it. The boundary between self and surroundings remains soft, defined more by function than by contrast. As it drifts, the body maintains its steady rhythm, the heart continuing its quiet work, the fluid within moving without resistance. These internal processes mirror the external motion, both operating within a framework that favors consistency over intensity. The entire system remains balanced, sustained by the same principles that govern the environment. The pale form passes through the dim water with little trace, its presence marked only by the faintest shifts in light and movement. It does not leave a lasting imprint, but becomes part of the ongoing flow, its existence integrated into the larger pattern of the sea. Within this quiet passage, life continues without interruption. The organism persists not by altering its surroundings, but by remaining in harmony with them, its form and motion reflecting the calm, enduring nature of the world beneath the ice. The result is a presence that feels almost weightless, carried forward by currents both external and internal, living out its existence in a state of gentle continuity, where survival is achieved through stillness as much as through motion. Certain patterns feel so constant that they begin to seem unquestionable, woven into the definition of life itself. Circulation carries color, oxygen binds within cells, and the movement of that system supports every moment that follows. These ideas settle into understanding, as if they are fixed, as if they apply everywhere life exists. And yet, within this quiet world beneath the ice, those expectations soften. What once appeared essential has been set aside, not through failure, but through a different alignment between body and environment. The absence that would seem impossible elsewhere becomes unremarkable here, carried as part of a system that continues without interruption. The body does not attempt to restore what is missing. It does not compensate by recreating the same structure in a different form. Instead, it follows another path, one that emerges from the conditions that surround it. The environment provides what is needed in ways that make the original requirement less central, allowing life to continue along a quieter, altered route. This reshaping of necessity does not occur suddenly. It unfolds across long spans of time, guided by steady conditions that remain consistent enough to support gradual change. With each generation, the organism moves further from what might once have been considered essential, settling into a new balance that reflects the world it inhabits. Within that balance, survival is maintained not by adhering to universal rules, but by fitting closely to a specific context. The systems that sustain life are shaped by what is available, by the temperature, the chemistry, and the movement of the surrounding environment. What matters is not whether a trait exists elsewhere, but whether it aligns with the conditions at hand. Beneath the Antarctic ice, this alignment becomes clear in the quiet persistence of a vertebrate whose circulation no longer follows the pattern seen across most of its relatives. The fluid that moves within it carries no color, yet it continues to sustain every process required for life. The absence does not disrupt the system, because the system itself has adapted to operate without it. This does not suggest that the earlier pattern was unnecessary, nor that one form replaces another in a simple way. Each exists within its own context, shaped by different conditions and constraints. What appears essential in one setting may become optional in another, depending on how the environment supports or limits the organism. The idea of perfection fades within this perspective. There is no single form that represents an ideal, no universal structure that defines success across all conditions. Instead, life adjusts, reshaping itself in response to the world around it, finding stability through alignment rather than through adherence to a fixed design. In this quiet adjustment, the organism becomes a reflection of its environment, its form shaped by the same forces that define the water it moves through. Every system, from circulation to movement, carries the imprint of that relationship, revealing how closely life and environment remain connected. The gentle drifting presence beneath the ice continues, sustained by processes that operate without excess, without urgency, and without the need for what once seemed indispensable. Its existence unfolds as part of a larger pattern, one that shows how life can persist through change that is both subtle and profound. What remains is a sense of continuity where each form of life follows its own path, shaped by the conditions that surround it. The absence of familiar features does not mark a failure, but a different expression of what it means to endure. And in that still, dim water, a body moves with quiet certainty, carried forward not by perfection, but by a precise and lasting fit.